And we would like to discuss about carbon border tax proposed by European Union and its possible impact worldwide. This is our content. So to start, European Union declared the introduction of Cbam, Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, to induce lower carbon emission and to block carbon leakage through international trade channel. This measure targets emission-intensive trade sectors such as steel, cement, aluminum, and so on. For the details, embedded emissions of the imported products will be calculated for both direct and indirect emission and be taxed. And after 3 years of transition period, it will be implemented in 2026. And through modification, carbon prices that already paid abroad would be considered. But Cbam is on this step of a formally adopted proposal, and the details of the levying methods are now in discussion. And various works in economics have examined their possible effectiveness in the perspective of climate mitigation. However, they also suggest that the costs might be paid mainly by developing countries. So which countries are most exposed to Cbam? We started from this simple question. This chart represents major exporters to EU regarding Cbam recovered products. Korea is definitely one of them, and with iron and steel accounting for the largest share. And countries in this chart are mainly included in our main analysis. And recent research on Cbam, for example, the research by this Alliance Research, specified which regions and countries are most exposed to the Cbam. So similarly, we would like to demonstrate 2 points regarding Cbam, impacts and actions. First, with network analysis on the example of EU's steel import, we would like to figure out different impacts of Cbam. Then, with actions being taken by affected countries, we would like to draw out national implications.
Okay, next I will introduce our analysis about impacts of Cbam on main 15 countries. We use 2 types of data to visualize the trade network. The first data is ITC data. We use it to get exported value of steel and iron from main 15 countries to EU. Since ITC data uses the same industry code as Cbam, we could get exact export values of the steel industry that EU taxes on. And the second one is MRIO data, and we use it to visualize the global value chain. MRIO data shows how the countries and the exported values are contributed by other countries, so we can investigate which countries will be affected by Cbam indirectly. This is the trade network from the main 15 countries to EU. The nose size represents the export value of the iron and steel. We can see that USA, China, Russia, Turkey, and Korea account for a majority of the export. To investigate the real effect of carbon tax, we get the data of the carbon border adjustment tax rate from UNTAD, and we use it as a weight. And this graph shows the trade network weighted by the CBA tax. So since USA and Korea has lower tax than others, the node size of USA and Korea had decreased significantly, but the node size of Russia, India, and China still accounts for a majority of trade network. We use also anti-gain as a way too, and it represents the vulnerability of climate change. So we use it as a way too, and in this graph we can see that India has larger nodes than before because India is the most vulnerable country to climate change. Also, we drew some global value chain graph. The difference from previous graph is the green nodes. The green nodes represents the countries that contribute to the main countries. So the green nodes countries export some steel industry to the main countries. And we can see some EU countries in green nodes, which means that EU countries can also be affected by Cbam. To see the international inequality, we drew this graph. The x-axis is the GDP per capita, and the y-axis is the export value. And we can see the negative trend line between the GDP per capita and the exported value weighted by Cbam. So it means that the Cbam can increase the international inequality.
From now on, we're going to talk about international agent response to Cbam. This chart presents how each country reacts to Cbam. Korea and Japan have similar plans to reduce carbon emission, as you can see, and China has a plan, but it is criticized as it is not enough to satisfy our international goal. As we already talked about, the big impact on Chinese and Indian steel industry in our network analysis. Chinese and Indian government expressed strong diplomatic response to Cbam, accusing it of discriminatory measure. Also, USA and Canada agreed to consult with EU and prepared to propose their own Cbam. You can see the plans of other countries as well. This part explains the mainstream transition to low-carbon steel production by firms level. Current steel production emits 2 tons of CO2 by 1 ton of steel. But by using hydrogen and carbon capture uses and storage or electric-based green electricity, we can reduce 30 to 40% of reduction of carbon emission or even accomplish net zero.
And let's take a look at this chart. This chart represents a relative steel industry vulnerability between countries we analyzed in the previous part. The y-axis represents a trade volume of steel industry exports to EU, and the x-axis represents investment size of its major steel firms in those countries. So the countries in the second quadrant, like China, India, Turkey, and Ukraine, are the most vulnerable countries since its trade volume are very large, while its investment size to develop green technologies in steel industry are too low or none at all. On the other hand, Korea has also very large trade volume of steel industry to EU, but it has the largest investment size in steel industry. So we can say that Korea is expected to easily adapt to the new era of steel industry comparing to other countries. So as the importance of green transition is increased facing those rapidly evolving trade arrangements, Korea government has actually declared to achieve 40% reduction of its carbon emissions by 2030 and proposed Green New Deal. As its goal is criticized as it is still insufficient, cutting back carbon emissions must be in line with the development of green technologies to reduce the cost at an affordable way. And for China, the exports volume is expected to decline at 6% in 2020, following further decline in the near future. China government is trying to introduce its own nationwide emission trading system, trying to improve its energy structures and afforestation. However, as we already see, China has to put more fundings and investments targeting industry sectors, especially steel industry, to effectively deal with the Cbam.
Meanwhile, there will be national distributional impacts at individual level through employment effects. Some literature proposed that the effect would not be that large, but still in developing countries, substantial amount of employment and income are provided by exports from emission-intensive industries. So potential increase in poverty levels and shocks on the labor market should be monitored. So to summarize on impacts, China, India, Russia are mostly affected, especially CBA is considered. And relatively disadvantageous effects on developing countries are found. And there could be some possible contagion of impacts to EU countries through global value chain. And on actions, investments for low carbon transition are not sufficient in the countries which would be relatively more affected. So while the Cbam would push many countries toward low carbon transition, there are confrontation and controversies are now present and should be dealt with. So these all means that international cooperation and investments are needed to facilitate low carbon transition, and there could be many various measures be taken, such as climate finance program and knowledge sharing program. And for Korea, while Korea is relatively active for investment on low carbon transition of the emission intensive industries requires immense efforts and time. So much more consistent effort is needed to address this challenge. Danke für Ihre Aufmerksamkeit. Thank you for listening.